Hello and welcome back to Exothermic Plays Games. I'm Exothermic and I've been doing a daily countdown of my 366 favorite video games of all time. Coming in at number 21 is BioShock Infinite.
Love the prophet because he...
As I mentioned when I covered BioShock 2 as my 171st favorite game back in July, I am talking about these games in basically the worst order possible. BioShock Infinite is the third and newest / last title in the franchise, and as a spoiler, yes, the first BioShock is still coming up somewhere in the next few weeks. It's almost fitting how out of order I'm talking about this franchise because this game's plot revolves in large part around time travel, alternating timelines, and multiversal theories. I'll warn you before I get into the real proper spoilers territory, but for now I'm going to very thoroughly establish the exposition before getting into the crazy stuff. Because I think one of the greatest strengths of BioShock Infinite is its world building and all of the crazy things that set up the second and third acts of the game. The year is 1912 and you play as Booker DeWitt, a man of questionable character who has been hired to find some girl and bring her somewhere. The details there are fuzzy and honestly don't really matter yet because they'll change. Multiverse. You're being rowed up to a lighthouse by a talkative duo who you later learn are named Robert and Rosalind Lutece. Remember them because they're important in a ton of ways. I should take a moment to mention that this game contains some pretty gruesome depictions of extreme violence, so if you're wanting to avoid that, this is just not going to be the video for you. But once you get to the top of the lighthouse, there's a chair. It's actually a rocket ship that launches you up and up and up and up into the sky to find Columbia, a supposed haven, an impossible city built on one man's ironclad ideals. If you've played either of the other BioShock games, that concept will certainly seem familiar to you, and that's absolutely intentional. The parallels between Rapture and Columbia are fairly poignant, but I'll address some more of that later. The important notes are that while Rapture was meant to be a critique on the extremes of total capitalism, Columbia is a critique on the extremes of religious nationalism. BioShock Infinite is many things, but it is not subtle. That may actually be my biggest critique of the game, is that some of the points it's making, especially early on, are probably a bit too heavy-handed, but it's still overall interesting narratively. That being said, this entire opening sequence is phenomenal and one of the greatest things ever done in a video game to immediately transport me into its world. What starts off as a weird religious concept focused on one man, Zachary Hale Comstock, and his family turns surprisingly violent when a priest must baptize you to enter the city. This is a great touch that we'll revisit, but once you are in Columbia proper and past the entrance with the rather unnerving religious statues of George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson, including symbolism that's, well, not part of history, there's a festival happening. As you soak in the floating buildings and the technology that makes it all work, there are a ton of little cues that indicate something else is up here. Obviously, the city is impossible, and there's something bizarre happening to make this doable in 1912. But my favorite cue is hearing a barbershop quartet belting out God Only Knows, which was originally written and recorded by the Beach Boys in, 1966. But not only is this entirely out of place, the performance is actually enrapturing, and I think I like this performance even more than the original, which is already probably tied with Wouldn't It Be Nice as my favorite Beach Boys song. The more you look, the more anachronisms you find, but the reason I like this one so much is because of how the meaning and words of the song relate to the revelations at the end of the game, making it just so absolutely perfect. What's not perfect is the people that live here. Holy shit, they suck. There's a raffle, and you draw a ball and actually win the raffle. Congratulations to you. Problem is, you don't know what you won necessarily yet. There's some, we'll go with odd wording about selecting the winner. And then they wheel out an interracial couple that you're supposed to throw the baseball at and start like lynching them, presumably as a reward. As you'll learn throughout the game, Comstock is a white supremacist that fancies himself a prophet of God. There's these audio diaries you can pick up and listen to, like other BioShock games, and some of them are excerpts from his sermons, and they're great for expanding the world building and the narrative, but it's, well, I don't like hearing them. As obtuse as it is, it does make the violence that's about to happen a little easier to stomach as the player. Regardless of what your choice is for the baseball, you're stopped as you're about to throw it at the couple, or at the announcer. There's a brand on your hand, and for all of his other faults, Comstock does at least have the appearance of being prophetic, because he foretold of an evil man that would come to Columbia to abduct his daughter with that brand on his right hand. It's you. You're the evil man. You're there to abduct his daughter. And, well, self-defense, am I right? The design of the combat in BioShock Infinite is overall the best of the trilogy. Like the others, you have a variety of guns, a melee attack, and spells that you cast, though this time they're called vigors rather than plasmids, but they're functionally similar. Each weapon, from the pistol to the RPG, feels unique and well-tuned in Infinite, and none of them seem straight up worse than the others, especially when you start factoring in all of the ways you can get bonuses for them. There's upgrades you can buy from vending machines to make each weapon better, but there's also a gear system. There's no stats on gear, but rather they provide bonuses to various parts of the game, like adding an electrical shock to your melee attack, or increased damage for headshots, or drastically increased damage from skylines. While I think the ammo rationing of the first BioShock is more interesting, and being a big daddy in the sequel is incredible, the thing that makes combat so terrific in Infinite is the skylines. There are these rails meant for basically trolleys throughout the clouds, going from platform to platform of the ever-shifting city in the sky, but you can actually hop on them with the hook you use as a melee weapon and ride it around, speeding up and slowing down like a roller coaster. Each rail is a one-way street, and you can hop around to navigate and outmaneuver enemies in combat, and even jump down on them for massive damage when you're going at high speeds. It's a ton of fun, and the DLC that's literally just a ton of combat after combat after combat in an area with massive skylines is great for that alone. Anyways, as you leave a trail of carnage and destruction in your wake, you head over to Monument Island, which is where the giant statue you've been seeing from every angle of the city is at, and that's where Elizabeth is held. Breaking into it is a lot of fun, and the game keeps you on your toes with occasional moments between fights against the security force, where you get to kind of be a tourist again. With each break, you'll often run into the Lutesses I mentioned earlier, and they're definitely quite odd, but also always fun. I love their little banter. The strangest part of the game to me, though, is when you go through the theater, which is dedicated to Abraham Lincoln, but not in the way you would expect. John Wilkes Booth is painted as a hero, and the theater doubles almost as a cathedral of sorts, with stained glass windows and all of these ceremonial candles. In the art and other depictions, Abraham Lincoln is portrayed as a devil, with Booth as a benevolent agent of God. Again, I am made uncomfortable and simply want to leave. The whole crow thing is pretty weird, though, which there's an enemy that commands these to, like, pluck out the eyes of sinners or something, and they carry a coffin, which is pretty metal, but it's still strange. When you make it into the actual statue, though, you find it's a secret facility for performing all sorts of crazy experiments filled with wondrous technology that absolutely should not be available in 1912. As you move through this facility, you come upon things that indicate they're performing tests on Elizabeth, and she's being studied rather than, just cared for. There are rooms she moves about with one-way observation windows trapped in that tower, like Rapunzel. You bust in there and free her. Unfortunately for you, she's also being guarded by a gigantic, terrifying, mechanical bird. The majority of the rest of the game is working your way towards finding a way out of Columbia, which is easier said than done due to being hunted by the entire population of the place. I really like the enemy designs of this game, with the different spellcasters having highly stylized costumes and the whole corrupt Americana vibe Columbia has going on, leading to things like the motorized patriots, which are terrifying George Washington Terminators, basically. The bosses on BioShock Infinite are huge steps up from the previous games, both in mechanical complexity and the way they interact with the story. But why are we going through all of this trouble over Elizabeth? Because she can open holes in the multiverse, of course. These holes she opens are called tears, and she can traverse space and time with them, except they're not stable enough for us to go through them yet. But through combat, now that you have Elizabeth, she can toss us ammo and other supplies that are laying around, but also open up tears that modify the terrain. Maybe we get a friendly turret. Maybe there's a wall we can hide behind. This is used in a variety of ways, and it's a ton of fun. But we're approaching the end of Act 1 here, and I'll be doing the heavy spoiler stuff now, so be warned. I can't really give a spoiler-free summary of my whole thoughts for the game because of how integral the story is to them. Booker and Elizabeth head towards a giant airship with hopes that it's a way out. Through great effort, they get there, but when Elizabeth finds out she's not being taken to Paris, as was promised, they're going to New York. She decks Booker. Unfortunately for them, the ship is then commandeered by the Vox Populi, a group of rebels that fight against Comstock's oppression, led by Daisy Fitzgerald. In their efforts to fulfill their demands, Booker and Elizabeth manage to travel through tears to alternate dimensions and secure weapons. The problem is, in this alternate dimension, Booker DeWitt is dead, as he was a leader and martyr for the Vox Populi movement. Much of the cast to this game has rather complex motivations that are rooted in core events in the timeline, and Daisy isn't quite the benevolent leader we were led to believe, even resorting to murdering children, which Elizabeth isn't about, and she kills Daisy where she stands, marking the first time that Elizabeth has actually killed somebody, rather than simply allowing you to do it. Having an airship again, you still need to leave, but have to destroy the Songbird in order to do so. Unfortunately, you fail. Your ship doesn't make it, and you have to figure out a new way out. But back on the ground, you're re-immersed in Columbia's story, learning about much of the backstory for the city's founding and how these anachronisms exist. The Luteces are not siblings, but are actually a singular person, but from different realities. In each of these different timelines, they discover technology that allows them to communicate across the multiverse and find each other. Comstock has a great many dirty secrets, and he killed both his wife and the Luteces to hide it all, so he could paint himself as the great prophet sent from God. But Elizabeth gets captured by Songbird, where she will be supposedly tortured and brainwashed. Booker is pulled through the timeline by yet another alternate Elizabeth, this time much older and set in the 1980s as Columbia is invading and destroying New York City. She said this is going to happen, and she couldn't stop it in this timeline because she's the one doing it, but it's not too late. If you go back to 1912 and kill Comstock and control Songbird to save younger Elizabeth, you could prevent this catastrophe from happening. So you do all of that. It's great. Actually, the end sequences for combat for the game are the best in the game, and it's actually the only game in the franchise where like the final boss fight feels properly amazing. That is historically been the biggest problem kind of plaguing this franchise, but I give it a pass on the first one because we'll talk about it later. But when Comstock dies, it's by your own hands. You drown him in baptismal water, which is an interesting choice. But in the process, you also destroyed a device called the Siphon, which it turned out was a limiter on Elizabeth's powers. With it gone, she's able to fully control these tears and open them whenever and wherever she wants. She also can understand the multiverse much better and takes you on a journey. You're at another lighthouse, but not the one from this game. It may be familiar, actually. It's the lighthouse from the start of the first BioShock game, taking you to Rapture. As you travel from lighthouse to lighthouse, you find they're all connected, and as she explains the multiverse to you, it becomes clear that Comstock can't truly be dead because there's an infinite number of Comstocks, but also that there's a great many memories that Booker had repressed. The Lutesses were the ones that had hired Booker, but they didn't actually hire him. He was a very depressed man who had a storied military career, having committed many atrocities in the battle at Wounded Knee. He eventually tried to find peace through religion and was going to be baptized, but at the last second backed out. Depressed and working for the Pinkertons, he also racked up quite the gambling debt. In order to wipe away the debt, he had to give up his daughter, Annabelle. That's where the Lutesses come in, working with Comstock to kidnap Annabelle, who is, in fact, Elizabeth. But as Booker fights to get back, the portal of the Lutesses machine opened up closes, and that's why Elizabeth is missing one of her pinkies. Existing in two realities is the reason that she can open tears and do any of this. So if there's infinite Comstocks, how do you stop this from happening? It's easy. You kill him before he can be born. But therein lies the problem, because Zachary Hale Comstock was not born as such. He was reborn in an alternate timeline where if Booker goes through with the baptism, he forsakes his birth name, becoming Comstock. Comstock is Booker, Booker is Comstock. So we come full circle with Booker being drowned in the baptismal waters, this time by many Elizabeths, as he almost was at the start of the game, and as Comstock died at his own hands. And that's the end of the game. Oh, but wait, there's more! I do want to very briefly touch on the DLC of the game. Burial at Sea, which is a two-part epilogue. It's set in Rapture as another timeline featuring Booker and a different Elizabeth. The idea is that Comstock feels remorse for some stuff. He goes to Rapture, reassumes his identity as Booker, and then there's this other Elizabeth kind of following and haunting him. It's actually pretty interesting, but this takes place just before the events of the first BioShock. The return to Rapture is phenomenal and ties together a lot of loose threads both from this game but also from the first two, finally showcasing how this title that for pretty much the entirety of the game feels very separate and like why is it actually called BioShock story-wise. It's connecting them now more directly than just the idea that there's always a man and there's always a lighthouse, which admittedly is a very cool connection. BioShock Infinite is a great game with immense care placed every step of the way to connect a timeline in shambles. The little hints and clues present from start to finish are terrific, the combat is fast and exciting, and the whole Booker is Comstock twist is one of my favorites in any game. Columbia is a very alive setting, and despite the things that make it uncomfortable, obviously that's intentional, they're meant to, I don't really... It does not bother me in the way that, like, why is this game doing this, making me feel things? I want games to make me feel things. I like that a game put me in a situation where I became angry with mad at the world around me and wanted to lash out, which then ties into, you know, the lashing out part, making the violence feel part of the world rather than just, hey, it's a game and you get to be violent. Isn't that fun? So I really like that I felt like I had a kind of compelling reason. And the Vox Populi are excellent foils to the evils of the city as well, presenting their own problems that also are, not okay. But really, I went from just really liking this game to absolutely loving it after the Burial at Sea storyline finished up, taking it in directions I never expected and putting a neat little bow on the entire franchise, with the post-credits scene being the very opening of the first game itself, allowing the whole trilogy to be played in an order that feels perfectly cyclical from start to finish. Join me tomorrow as I talk about my 20th favorite game, where I am in love with the leading man.